Welcome once again, and thank you for joining us in this webinar. Since 1994, the country has made significant strides towards equality, yet there are deep-rooted socioeconomic inequalities that are persisting. The pandemic highlighted these challenges, prompting initiatives like Operation Vulindlela under the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. So today, we address these issues alongside the ongoing call for justice and reparation for apartheid-era victims. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations remain largely unfulfilled, leaving many still seeking dignity and recognition. Our esteemed panel will explore critical questions on race relations, corporate accountability, anti-corruption, and the socio-economic legacy of apartheid. I would now like to hand over to the director of the center, and that is Prof. John Mark E. Prof, over to you. Prof. John.
Sorry. Yes, sorry, I was muted. Good afternoon, everyone. And we are very delighted to have you join us this afternoon on this excuse me, very important topic being hosted by the African Center for Transnational Criminal Justice, Faculty of Law at the University of the Western Cape. Mine is a very simple one. It is to sort of give an icebreaker to this important discussion while we are gathered here today. Why 30 years might not really be a long time in the life of a country, but 30 years is a long time in the life of a human being. A child born 30 years ago would obviously be an adult by now and must have carved away a career path for himself or herself, as the case may be. And the democracy, why do we keep going back to the question of 30 years since democracy? Was democracy supposed to solve all of South Africa's problem? By no means. Because for one, besides apartheid, there are many other factors that also contribute to the socio-economic challenges that confront South Africa today. But in the presentation by Start SA to Parliament just in August 2024, the presenter highlighted the fact that South Africa is still widely regarded as the most unequal society in the world. And one would then say that even though all of these failures may not be attributable to democracy, but to the extent that the roots of this problem can be traced to centuries of colonialism and apartheid, then one can fairly say that democracy was, or the advent of democracy was expected at the very minimum to provide the necessary ingredients for socio-economic transformation and for constructing an egalitarian society. The second issue is that to the extent that these centuries of colonialism and apartheid created the conditions for the present situation in which the country finds itself, social problems, economic problems, of course, which are by no means unique to South Africa, but to the extent that colonial and post-apartheid continuities continue to manifest themselves and perpetuate these conditions in South African society today, then one is fair to say that we need to critically interrogate democracy and the extent to which the advent of democracy has actually positively impacted the lives of the everyday citizen in this country. And finally, I would say that the other issue of reparation and reconciliation are integral to either the success or failure or maybe not failure has to do it, but the lack of positive impact was initially expected by the citizenry on the dawn of democracy in South Africa. One can then say that there is maybe not really despondence, but sort of frustration that is almost palpable. Whether what one looks at is the question of reparation or the question of lack of socio-economic transformation, and all of these other issues. And these are manifested in various ways, whether you look at the rising level of crime or you look at issues of gender-based violence, or you look at statistics on other social indexes relating to human development, or you even race relations when you talk about reconciliation. All of these aspects are connected. So one can't discuss the success or otherwise of 30 years of democracy in South Africa without actually addressing these other aspects that affect the everyday South African in this country. So I think I've spoken enough. Let me leave the floor for those who are most competent to analyze and prefer solutions to this topic. I thank you for joining us. I hope we have a very robust discussion. Thank you. Anza, over to you.
Thank you, Prof, for your opening remarks. Just before I hand over to our moderator, whom I can confirm she's here, I just want to announce that we won't be able to have one of our speakers, Commissioner Prof. Madlingozi, due to other work conflicting commitments. However, that said, we do have our Dean with us, and welcome to the Dean and also colleagues as well. Ms. Thandi Matthews, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much. Thank you, Linda.
All right.
Just by way of introduction to who our speakers are, firstly, we have with us esteemed panelists, Dr. Shirley Gunn, who I'm pleased to introduce, and graduated at UCT with a Bachelor of Social Sciences. And this was in 1981. And in the following year, Shirley was recruited into the political underground while actively involved in the mass democratic struggle. In 1985, she was recruited into the armed wing of the ANC in Mkhonto we Sizwe. She received military training inside the country and in Cuba and Angola in 1986 and 1987. She returned to co-command the Ashley Kriel detachment. Shirley testified at the TRC in August 1997 and was found to have been a victim of gross human rights violations. She has worked closely with survivors through her work with the Human Rights Media Center and also with the Kulamani Support Group. She's both founder of the organizations, the South African Coalition for Transitional Justice. Currently, Shirley serves as the Executive Director of the HRMC and the SHCTJ. In March 2024, she was awarded an honorary doctorate in social sciences by UCT for her life's work. Welcome, Shirley. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Sandiswa Kobe, who's a lecturer at UNISA's Department of Christian Spirituality, Church History, and Missiology. She's the first Black South African woman to be awarded the DST NRF Scholarship under the Vrije University Amsterdam NRF Desmond Tutu Doctoral Program in Theology. Her PhD on Desmond Tutu provides a unique contribution in conflict and peace dialogues, connecting to the current and ongoing debates regarding human rights violations, massacres, and genocides across various contexts in the world, delving into African mythologies, proverbs, and religions, and to present a dialogue stemming from South Africa to the diaspora, allowing Black theology to dialogue with African spirituality and culture. Dr. Kobe's PhD and publications debunks a linear definition and approach on Ubuntu that has been promoted post-1994 and post-TRC. And an underlying focus of her research work is to understand how the Abantu people dealt with issues of wrongdoing in their own society. Thus, the moral and ethical understanding in context of gross human rights violations is at the center of her work. As a result, her publications on gender, Ubuntu, justice, Desmond Tutu, and the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission have attracted international and national scholars across different disciplines as she offers a unique approach specializing on Ubuntu and Black theology. And I'm Thandiwe Matthews. I'm a lecturer at the Wits School of Governance, and currently I'm completing a PhD between Wits University and the International Institute of Social Studies based at Erasmus University, Rotterdam, which explores the elite contestation surrounding the relationship between constitutionalism, socio-economic rights, social policy, and gender to advance substantive equality in South Africa. So thank you all for joining us. I'd like to start by posing a question to Shirley about the TRC and why it failed to address the socio-economic dimension of transitional justice. Also, how has this failure impacted on the existing socio-economic disparities we experience in post-1994 democratic South Africa? I just also, before you respond, Shirley, I just wanted to say that we'll do a discussion for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll open the floor to Q&A. Thank you so much. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Thandi. When I thanked you for your introduction, my mic was off, so thank you for the introduction too. If I understood your question correctly, Chair, I don't think that the TRC was ever established for the purposes of addressing socioeconomic injustice and redress. It was established to reckon with the past, make it public, get the truth known, and offer, it was a dual process of carrot and stick, I suppose, offer perpetrators the opportunity to confess their crimes, and if they did so fully, they would get amnesty, and if they didn't, they would be prosecuted. And then one of the committees of the TRC, the R&R Committee, Rehabilitation and it was, sorry, the Reparations and Rehabilitation Committee was to make recommendations to the government on how to address and restore the dignity of people who had borne the brunt of apartheid through its process of human rights violation hearings. It was quite confined, and there was a codicil to that, where the TRC in its final codicil, final report, had said that the list of 22,500 people cannot be the end of the story. Many people were excluded from the process, and there should be an ongoing registration process of victims of gross human rights violations so that the countries could address the legacy squarely of apartheid and address the human rights dignity of those whose rights were violated. The violations are quite prescripted, and herein lies a fundamental discordance. I think Prof referred to a discordance, because we have a push from the ground. And I'm going to take one step back. So as you rightly introduced me, Chair, I come from the mass democratic struggle and also from a guerrilla army formation that was part of our struggle. And by the time at the start of democracy, I can tell you that the nation was exhausted. We were battle worn. It had been a very, very tough journey of opposing apartheid and the bullies with the guns. And so when it came to the first election, I think we were just sighing relief. We had fresh legs. We had new leadership coming in that we provided platforms for to speak, the voices that hadn't been seen and heard because they were either behind bars or in exile. And I think this was our gravest mistake, that we believed that the new democratic dispensation was going to address the needs on the ground, and it didn't. And there was an economic policy that was signed onto that was behind our backs, a structural adjustment gear program. That's not what we had voted for. We had voted for an RDP process that was well canvassed across the country. So we were sold down the line, sold off by the economic masters of the globe, really. And I say this saying with a deep sort of sense of remorse, having seen the elections and the elections result, because what happens globally affects us as well. We are part of the global world. So we sat back, we thought things were going to work, and we only had to, we had the TRC, it came up with its findings, it did an excellent job under the circumstances, but it wasn't the end of the day, and it wasn't going to be the pancreas for all our problems in our country. And that we trusted the government would see to, and it didn't, because we had there was honoring of a different kind of economic structure that was not what I fought for and not what my comrades died for. So I'm afraid I feel very much still in the trench. And I've sided my elbow and my arms, my legs, my heart, my brain is very much with the victims of gross human rights violations, that at least can be addressed 26 years after the closure of the TRC, 30 years into our democracy. I think we've become the skunk of the world again. And we must get out of this. We must change things. If we have any credibility as human beings, all of us in this room and everyone who's conscious should be part of changing our country for the better. So I can do that as a campaigner and as an activist for the rights of victims of gross human rights violations. It is circumspect, it is circumscribed, and I think there are plenty of other social justice movements that are run parallel to our endeavors that must work in tandem for us to have equity and justice in this country.
Thank you so much, Shirley. I mean, Prof. John Mark mentioned, what does democracy mean on our continent? And I think often, at least as my generation, which I don't think is necessarily the youth, I think I'm in between that. But how do we understand democracy through the lens of liberation? And what indicators do we use to measure what we consider democracy to be? And I think that's a very pertinent discussion that we haven't really had in the South African context. I'd like to move now to Prof. Kobe, to speak to us in the context of socioeconomic injustice, the challenges that were raised by Shirley concerning, you know, this exhaustion of struggle, the lack of time to heal, what does that then mean to participate as an active social citizen within a democratic society in order to continue with the advancement of what the Constitution and the RDP guaranteed, and how that then speaks to the state of social cohesion in South Africa, and to what extent has race relations improved in the last 30 years in your view? But more importantly, what role economic inequalities play currently within the current crisis of race relations in South Africa? Thank you, Dr. Kobe.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't know why I cannot unmute my video, but can you help me unmute my video?
I'm not sure that I can help you unmute your video, but we can hear you
Because
quite clearly on your audio.
it's saying you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it. Okay. Let me just redo that. Just give me a second. Can you check now? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, let me get a cause. Okay, thank you so much. I thought perhaps people will also want to see who's speaking. It's interesting because in my mind I thought perhaps we are going to do submissions and then we have a dialogue. So but to answer perhaps your question, well, for me as a theologian, maybe I would just start from the proceedings leading to the TRC, because in why 30 years after democracy, some of these issues have not been addressed. Most of these issues, let me not say some of these issues, because most of these issues, in fact, we are living in a country that seems to be going backwards. For me, the main issue begins with the churches in South Africa, because we always make assumptions about the church, that the church is this innocent space, and we have created some kind of saints through this. The problem, the reason why we have not addressed these issues, I don't really believe that even the liberation movement wants to address them. And I don't believe even the church itself does want to address them. Because in 1990, when the prisoners were released, the former president, FUW de Klerk, asked the church to create a conducive space for negotiations and reconciliation in South Africa. And this was even before, and reconciliation, it's a topic that the church had discussed for most time of the struggle against apartheid. And that's why your likes of Desmond Tutu became famous. At the Rustenburg conference, when the church was supposed to stand for justice, for reparations and all these things, Professor Willie Jonker from Stellenbosch comes at the Rustenburg conference to ask for forgiveness on behalf of the Dutch Reformed Church. And then he argues that Black theologians, political theologians, will not help us into a united witness to bring about the democratic dispensation in South Africa. And therefore, these discourses must be dismissed. And of course, rightfully so for him, the Black theologians were making demands of land. In fact, if you read the Kairos document even defended some issues on violence, that arguing that, well, how are people supposed to respond when the government itself is violent? Then at that conference, he argues that the church must become a space to pray and be a united witness. And Desmond Tutu responds to him by agreeing to that. And for me, from there, then that Desmond Tutu agreeing to that and offering forgiveness even to the Dutch Reformed Church and Willie Younger without even consulting the Black masses was appalling. And then he argues the issue of justice as an eschatological issue, something that will happen in the future. For now, we must focus on reconciliation and peace. And then that sets the tone for what we have right now in South Africa. In fact, and people talk about, because it's so interesting how even with the TRC, we want to blame the politicians. And I'm not defending them. Of course, you know what they are. But I think the honesty and truthful of how we discuss these things are very important. The TRC itself agenda was actually coming from the church itself. If you read the book written by who is John, I forgot his surname, but the Rabble Rouser, the book of Desmond Tutu, where he writes about Desmond Tutu, the Rabble Rouser, he actually talks about how Desmond Tutu argued to the politicians how reconciliation must take, how the TRC proceedings must proceed. And it's such a church thing that must happen to the at the TRC. And of course, Desmond Tutu wins this agenda. Even if you look at the TRC, the people who were at the TRC actually were theologians. And interestingly, the powerful people at the TRC came from the colonizing church, which is the Anglican Church and the Methodist Church. And then you have all the important positions where theologians sat and priests sat presiding over the TRC. So we can debate about that the TRC was not a space where we must find justice, but that was what was sold to our people through the rhetoric. And also, if you talk about reconciliation, obviously for a human being, and obviously in our indigenous language, we talk about uxolelwaniso. There can never be uxolelwaniso without addressing the issue of structural injustices. And so the TRC now becomes this thing about Black people where they need to perform Black pain, and women are used for this performance. In my preparation here, 5 pages, I was going to talk about those women who were at the TRC who could not find justice, who could not find even the truth, like who were not even allowed to be themselves as African in this space. That has been argued by scholars like Antjie Krog, that it was an Ubuntu space, a space that likens the traditional negotiations, which is absolutely not true. The TRC was a church. And so to think that you can address issues of truth-telling through coming up with something that belongs to the church, where the church only knows how to actually hide violations. And for me, that was just the first mistake. And so when we speak about now what has not happened, and we talk about all the gear, we talk about the RDP houses. In the TRC of South Africa, we even argue that the TRC was an Ubuntu. We have a footnote about the TRC being on the constitution, interim constitution, Ubuntu. And Desmond Tutu even in the report talks about that, but there was not even any space for Ubuntu at the TRC. So we must take serious the moment of 1991, when the church decided that what we needed in South Africa is reconciliation. And therefore, questions of justice, of reparation will be something that is futuristic, that we should not prioritize. And also the argument that it was so violent in the 1990s and whatever. the township are so violent today. I mean, our kids are dying right now of rotten food, and I have not seen any NGO that has said anything about that. If there is, someone must tell me, but people are dying. Our kids are dying. Our kids are being trafficked. Our kids are under drugs. I mean, I was in the Eastern Cape. It was what I saw there, where drugs now are in the villages. And really, this is our parents fought for liberation and justice, and what they got was democracy and so many human rights organizations that we don't really know what they are doing. So I'll just stop there in answering this question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kobe. Yeah, I also, I wanted to build on what you were saying about, we fight for liberation. We said we get democracy and human rights, but who gets to decide what constitutes human rights? And that, I think, is something that is under constant contestation, both through human rights advocacy, but also the institutionalization of human rights in law. Shirley, I'd like to go back to you. And also, to pick up on what Dr. Kobe was saying, when it comes to the TRC recommendations for reparation, what have been the obstacles to implementation? Sorry, Shirley, and also sorry, Shirley, to interrupt you. I also just wanted you to, as someone who participated in the TRC, to pick up on what Dr. Kobe was saying about the performance of grief and the performance of pain and the exclusion of women from that process.
Okay. Let me first start off by thanking the previous speaker. A very interesting approach to examining the TRC. I testified at the Great Hall at the university where the organization is based. Let me just get the full name and proper name. African Center for Transnational Criminal Justice is based. And it was to a sea of faces I'd never seen before. When I was asked, when Denzel Potgieter asked me, so do I swear? And I said, yes, I swear a lot. He turned around to his colleagues at the table and said, I think we've got a problem. And they produced another kind of oath, which was a non-religious one, which I swore to, and that I would tell the truth and nothing but the truth. And it went on from there. I think there was definitely an element of the leadership, and particularly of Desmond Tutu and a man of the cloth at the helm. It had a huge, I think, it framed the TRC, but I would not say that it was a church, so why do I say that? Because, going back to the Kairos documents and the movement that we were part of, particularly in the 80s, I think liberation theology was a cornerstone of so many young people's lives. And it's not about leadership. It's really about what was happening on the ground. And we had a hope for change. We believed in liberation theology. We believed in our struggle, and that there's a struggle for a just cause that we were fighting. And so all of a sudden we come to the TRC where the playing field is there's an attempt to level the playing fields. And the ANC didn't fully cooperate, in fact, wanted to embargo the final report, like the Nationalist Party under, what's his name, de Klerk. I think it entered the political arena. very squarely. I wasn't talking about RDP houses. I was talking about the RDP document, which was a far more inclusive approach to what our vision for South Africa. It wasn't these Mfezinyawu houses that are built across the country on tiny properties that don't that are totally unsuited for human habitation. And so I wasn't referring to houses, I was referring to our vision. And that vision was a political one, it wasn't a church-based one. But we had that flow and that river and the support of religious thought in our movement.
Apologies, Shirley. Sorry
Yeah?
I do apologize for interjecting your train of thought. Can you just perhaps adjust your camera? We can't.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of
Oh,
course. Sorry,
perfect. Okay.
Sorry.
All right. Thank
I'm
you.
actually on the wrong page because I was flipping through the people present here. You can't see me yet, can you?
No, now we can't.
Okay, here you go. All right, here you go. Sorry.
Yes,
Oh,
perfect.
I'm so sorry.
All
Yeah,
right. Thank
I was
you.
looking at who was in the room. I like to know who I'm speaking to. So thank you for that interjection. Why were the TRC recommendations not implemented? Well, you see, actually, the TRC was rather a toothless animal in that it could only make recommendations. It had to hand over its recommendations to the president to consider and then discuss at cabinet and at parliamentary level. And in March 2003, this finally happened. 1998, 1999, 2000, 2001, 2003, so many years after the TRC and people had testified and performed, as you put it. Yes, it was a performance in a sense that you were on a stage, and only 2,000 were on the stage. So for the majority, actually, it was a written statement by a statement taker, and those statement takers. And the statement process was not adequate, actually. When I wrote my statement myself, and I looked at the statement format, I said, I'm sorry, I'm going to put this aside and I'm going to write my statement. And I made corrections to that statement that I should have actually adhered to. And I said, these are my recommendations, don't follow that format, go this way. And Desmond said, Potgieter, Denzel Potgieter said, thank you very much for your inputs there. Nothing changed. And then it came to the politicians to decide on the recommendations that were presented to it, that were finalized by the R&R committee. And they were comprehensive. They were on 5 legs. And I think the entire the president did not consider the codicil, where the TRC had said that the process of identifying victims of gross human rights violations should continue. He presented it as a fait accompli, a closed list. These are the people we'll see to. We'll give them a final reparations. We don't want them in our lives. We'll give them what they want, and they must go away. And as far as all the other recommendations went, they did zilch. And only in 2014 did we have some regulations around education that not many people are benefiting from. And we haven't got a housing regulations. We haven't got community rehabilitation regulations. We haven't got medical. And there's no speak of psychosocial support. So it was a case of lack of political will and lack of political interference, because there were 150 or 450 cases, 150 of them very strong, handed over by the Amnesty Committee to the government to further investigate. The NPA did not do its job. There was a hold on that, and that was interference. That's come out in affidavits in the courts recently. So there are 2 things that inhibited it. 1, lack of political will. 2, lack of political interference. And thank God we have got a coalition that is focusing specifically on the regulations of the TRC and their implementation, and that is still at the forefront of the struggle today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that response, Shirley. I will now just ask Dr. Kobe to respond to what Dr. Shirley Gunn has just said. And after responding, please, can you also answer this question? What is the nexus between corruption and socio-economic inequalities? And what measures can be taken to combat corruption? Dr. Kobe?
Thank you so much for your question. And I do think I am not going to be able to answer that question of combating corruption. Because I think combating corruption is such a very broad thing, because land conquest, that is corruption. And when we talk about corruption, we want to focus on I don't know how to put it in words, but we want to focus on things that actually can be solved, like now or something. I don't know how to say it, but I will not answer that question, because the country in itself is built on corruption. And to have minority owning the rest of the country, that is corruption. And I'm saying this as a descendant of Untsikane, who in our theology books and we talk about as the so-called first Christian, if there's such a thing as a first Christian in Africa. And I remember, I don't know, 2016 or 2018, I was at Stellenbosch, and Archbishop Thabo Makgoba was talking about the issue of land and the church. And I spoke to him about the land that was owned by my family in Port Alfred, that is owned by the Anglican Church. His response was that they created a charity thing there in the church, without consulting any of us who come from the family of Ntsikane. So, I mean, for me, that is corruption in itself. And also now maybe to engage some of the points, and maybe also to just advance my input in this discussion. For me, that just this talk about inclusion, cohesion, there's always been very problematic terms that we use in this country. And I'm opening my thesis here, where Steve Biko critiques the whole notion of integration, because this inclusivity, what are we being included in? Who sets the table for us to be included in whatever is there? And Biko warns us about this agenda of inclusivity and integration, that when we agree to integration, we will never achieve the question of justice, the question of land. He argues that integration is a concept defined by whites and never examined by blacks. Integration is based on white people's values, spirituality, and culture, which means for black people to survive in such a society is just, I don't know, very toxic. I can read all these things that Steve Biko talks about when he speaks about this question of inclusivity and etc. Because also on the question of RDP, our people doesn't understand the vision of this. What they understood is that what happened is that they were built those houses. It's the same thing when we now, for example, with the economic freedom fighters. I love them so much, and I think they have a brilliant idea on the issue of how we address issue of xenophobia in South Africa. But to think that you are going to go to a township person who's hungry, who's suffering, who's eating rotten food and talk about Pan-Africanism and Black consciousness, that is a Pan-Africanist agenda and Black consciousness agenda that is void of the poor. So the same thing we talk about, I mean, I'm coming from the church. We have so many documents that we created in the struggle against apartheid. We had so many documents to address the issues that were facing South Africa under the apartheid government. But not even any of those documents were ever implemented. Of course, let me not say were never implemented. I must just say that the documents that won were the documents that speak of this soft language of inclusivity, of peace, of let's reconcile, and all of these things. The issues that are being addressed at the Kairos document were never addressed. And of course, when I argue that the church, the whole notion, I think we have to understand the history of this country. Who is the colonizer? The colonizer is not just, we're not talking about just the state here. We are talking about the church. We're talking about the university. These people work together. The missionaries, for example, Mudimbi in his book in 1984 writes that they were the most successful colonizers than any of the colonizers, because they came first and came last. And today, quite frankly, I argue this about NGOs, that they are the new missionaries that we have in our societies. So to sort of like speak about documents that were created and whatever visions that we have, it boils down to the ground. What do people understand this post-1994 government had done? And also, the issue of reconciliation is a theological term. There's no philosopher, there's no politician who has the history of this word. It's adopted from theologians. So therefore, the discourse follows the theology. And this is where I argue about this. And to show that they understood themselves, the politicians, that they know nothing about this thing of reconciliation. They had Villavicentia as the head of research. They had Desmond Tutu, a theologian, as the chairperson. They had Alex Borain. I mean, I can go on. So many theologians were at the TRC, because this concept is only understood really by them. And it's a new modern concept that the politicians even themselves are beginning to actually engage. And this is not to argue that our politicians post-1994 have not failed our people. But my argument here, my submissions, is that when we look at what is wrong with the country, we must look at them in totality. For example, in my thesis, I actually question the morality and the ethics of saying that the victims at the TRC of South Africa must be paid, I mean, lousy money, actually. And at that time, the rest of the victims are left behind, because the TRC also chose which victims must appear at the TRC. And this is why you have all these women that then become these performers who are used by the TRC to define what reconciliation and Ubuntu means. You can go to the TRC report, you will see that the people who define reconciliation and Ubuntu are actually women whose actually experiences were not accommodated at the TRC. So they were there on behalf of their husbands and their sons. but they couldn't talk about themselves. So then you have this kind of monster. And then that says also then now it says that, okay, we should pay these victims that appear. What about the rest? Because apartheid didn't happen to individuals. It happened to Black people. It happened to the community of Black people. So whatever means of justice that must be done, it must be done in totality. So to only focus on individuals, and I see all this literature that praise, I mean, that critique the decision made by the politicians. But also before the TRC itself, we did talk about the fact that the ANC government didn't have money because money was looted in government before they came into power. This was discussed in the proceedings leading to the TRC. How are we going to address these issues? Because the ANC government doesn't have money. And again, as I'm saying, this is not to differ. For me, what the ANC has failed us to in this country is to create a culture of accountability and responsibility from our politicians. They have failed to stand for justice. I mean, and now we have even lost the political win. We have the GNU. We have a DA standing proudly on racism and gathering, but you can't even have, I remember when we started Abantu Book Festival, it was always on the newspaper how white people were not allowed to gather at the Abantu Book Festival because white people must always be included. So we still cannot gather alone as Black people and talk about our suffering. So I don't know how to answer these questions because even in academia, I'm coming from the University of South Africa, it needed a dean in the College of Human Sciences to say, this is what we are going to do in this university to implement transformation. The money was given by the government, by the head to implement transformation, but the money was not going to the right people that needed the money. So in those words, I'm just saying that I cannot answer these questions, but I'm going to continue to pose these actually very things that are in our hearts as Black people, our people in the townships, our people in the villages. They are living in a war zone. I think that in the countries that have war, South Africa, people die in this country are actually making the number also.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kobe. I'm now going to do a wrap up, and my apologies, I really had to run to the restroom. Just briefly also, just to go back to you, Shirley, you know, you also were someone in detention with a young child in detention. And so I think, you know, noting that experience of women in struggle is an important one. I just wanted to also, you know, as a lawyer, and I would have liked for Prof. Madlingozi to have been here to talk about the complexities of trying to hold the state accountable while at the same time essentializing rights which are constantly under evolution, under constant contestation. And when I was doing my own research, one of my participants who senior, I mean, these are senior government officials, and I think often we think about the state as the monolith. We think about government as this kind of, you know, one-party state without realizing that there are actual people who have certain ideologies and politics also working within the state as bureaucrats. And the senior official said to me, you know, I'm a very optimistic person about the Constitution. I also come from a family that sacrificed a lot for me to be free. And my grandfather wrote the first anthology of poetry to be banned by the apartheid state in Cry Rage. So we've had these conversations, and one of the officials asked me, when one actually assesses the human rights impact, it seems minimal, which in my view, one should then go back and really ask, do our rights really look good on paper? Do we actually really have a progressive constitution? Another one of the participants said to me, is South Africa progressive because we have made a policy choice to combat inequality, Or are we progressive because we are so unequal? In that context, basically meaning any policy that would have been implemented to advance the constitution emanating from our apartheid past, anything would have been considered to be progressive. And so reducing Black people to a basic minimum core and saying, well, this is what rights are, rather than understanding what I think Dr. Kobe is referring to as a dignified understanding of Blackness and pain and grief. How do we proceed to continue to acknowledge our past in our present, to be able to explore nuance and to unpack not just our history as a TRC as an individual kind of event, but also as an ongoing process in the context of a very complicated global economy and global or a geopolitical space at the moment that is under huge contestation. So just lastly, I wanted to ask about your views about socioeconomic rights, human rights as indicators, as a tool of political technology of knowledge production and governance, that while human rights language may be integrated into policy-making processes, the universal nature of the application obscures the complex particularities of diverse contexts. And it also allows the government an opportunity to create an illusion of promoting human rights while at the same time not quite actively addressing the complexities and inequalities and oppression and marginalization that continues to persist on the ground. So I was using my chair privileges to just pose that last question to both Shirley and to Dr. Kobe, if you think that there's any role of rights to play in the current framework of where we are right now. Thank you. Shirley, you can go first, but you're unmuted. Sorry,
Yes.
you are muted. Okay, now I can.
Tandi, that was a mouthful and a huge question that you've asked us. And I'm not an academic, so I might not, and I'm not a lawyer, and so I might not speak fully to the question that you're asking. But I do think that I'm going to answer it in this way. I want to just pick up on something very critical that Dr. Kobe has put on the table, and it's this word reconciliation. And I'm going to then proceed to rights. Quite frankly, I think it was the whole notion of setting up a TRC, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, was problematic in its name, in its titling, and maybe Dr. Kobe is totally correct that it was the influence of the theologians to incorporate reconciliation. Because for me, and for hundreds and thousands of people, it's a question of achieving truth, achieving justice and accountability, then proper delivery of reparations, and then we can talk about reconciliation. So I really thought it was, for a long time, and still do, think it's like putting the cart before the horse. And when Frank Chikani had his feet washed by the Minister of Law and Order, who was Adrian Vlok, on behalf of the nation, I was very, very disturbed by that. And when the same man, in the form of the former Minister of Law and Order, wanted to wash my feet, I said, absolutely not. And I would be the last human being in South Africa in the queue whose feet you need to wash. And so, and I also thought it was highly problematic for the TRC to hone in on Frank Chikani and forgiving Adrian Vlok, who was really a masterful lawyer, knowing full well that his forces were up to human rights abuses and atrocities, and that there were war crimes. And he was a lawyer, he knew better, he dodged the bullets, and the TRC provided a shield. So all of these things sit very uncomfortably for me. But now let's come to democracy. We do have the opportunity to vote. The problem was in the dawn of our democracy, we inherited the apartheid debt. So we didn't bring on we inherited the apartheid debt, one. Two, we didn't follow the recommendations of the TRC that said that there should be a wealth tax and that the corporate community who benefited from apartheid should in fact pay reparations. None of that was followed through, and I believe it ought to be. Even now, we've got the JSE records, the stock exchange, Johannesburg Stock Exchange records. We know who they are, we can finger, we can point. And I think so. When Dr. Kobe said we don't have money, yes, there is money. We just have to put it towards the right causes at this point. And we have to get the citizens who have been benefiting all these years and still benefit in our democracy must contribute to redress in this country. And we should hold them to account to that. Then I would be satisfied that we've got a working democracy that favors the poor people in this country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shirley. Dr. Kobe?
Thank you so much. Well, I just want to say to the last point, actually, I was referring to the TRC, the money that we talk about. It's a money that came from the US, actually. And I mean, the money that we always talk about, that those victims were supposed to get money. And my question is that which victims must get money and which victims must not get money? When we all as Black people in this country suffered under the apartheid government. But to answer your question, I think also I'm not a lawyer. And actually, I was looking forward to having this conversation with Professor Madlingozi, especially because also he wrote a beautiful paper with Prof. Ramose on the question that you are asking us about now. Because I would say, to answer this question, yes, Black people have the right to life, you know. Black people have the right to life and to being and becoming. And I think for us, students of Ubuntu, students of Ramose, Professor Ramose Mkobe, that's what at stake for us. Because the Constitution and the TRC itself uses these terms as if Ubuntu will be included in the Constitution. But as I'm saying, Prof. Madlingozi is not here. He was going to say more to us about that issue of the Constitution not actually accommodating Isintu and Abantu. And these are the majority of Black people in this country. So while we have these rights and in fact, I don't know if we have them when the Isintu is not part of the TRC. Perhaps another group of people in the country has these rights because then the Constitution talks through their own philosophy and spirituality and culture, but ours is not accommodated within this Constitution. And I think that's why other people are just, for example, now the MK, very dismissive of the Constitution because of how these rights in the Constitution have not translated to the lived experiences of Black people. And also perhaps it's even very difficult even for our people to understand these rights we are talking about. So perhaps until we talk about human rights through Isintu Abantu, then maybe we can have, otherwise now we can have, going back also to Dr. Reverend Chikane, We can have civil society in South Africa grandstanding and performing. We can go to the, and I am pro-Palestine saying this, we can be very good in international relations, and these are all just politics. But here at home, we can tell the poor the same, Dr. Frank Chikane and the SACC, for example. And I speak like this because I'm a theologian. The only best place I know best is my people, Black people, and the church and academia in which I work in. Because we can be very good in speaking about these rights to the rest of the continent and rest of the world. I even closed here in when I prepared this paper, which I think I will publish, that when we talk about human rights shouldn't they begin, for example, through Isintu. In isiXhosa, they always say, we know that Lerato is a human being in the way Lerato treats her family, in the way he respects the dignity of those he lives with. And then we dare say, ngumuntu ke uLerato. And in Isintu, we don't start outside. It is the inside that shows the outside that these are human beings. But in the human kind of human rights we have currently, it is always about performance. You know, we must perform for the world. That we have, we say we have the greatest constitution, but it has not translated to the lived experiences of Black people in this country. And so this question of rights and human rights becomes an interesting one, especially when we know even the NGOs get their money from big companies. We see what is happening in Congo. We see how all these computers we are using, children are suffering. The suffering of Congo is actually allowing us now to have this computer and talk right now in this panel today. So I really don't know this question, how to answer this question. But I would say perhaps a friend of mine from Germany has told me that in their university, actually now they have done some unpacking of missionary education and missionary works in Africa and the rest of the world. Because there is a similarities how these NGOs of human rights speak about human rights, but the human rights that matter most are the human rights that the big funder is saying you must fight for. NGOs in South Africa pretend as if apartheid was not about cheap labor. All of a sudden now, no, apartheid was not about cheap labor. So the poor in the townships, they don't know what they're talking about when they're talking about the competition of jobs. That if I am a South African, I want a decent wage. But if someone is coming from a war zone, that person just wants to breathe, doesn't care whatever money they're being paid, because they are not at home and they are coming from, they're running away from a war zone. And then we say when the poor in the township raise these issues, we say, no, they don't know what they're talking about, you know? And we have done so well as within this context of human rights organization to think for the poor. We even argue, I had a friend of mine who said to me, I'm an academic, I don't know anything about the suffering of Black people and all this stuff. I'm just an elite. That's what they said to me, because they work for an NGO and they believe they are based on the ground and all these things. And I asked him the question, who sponsors you? So, so because you are working for an NGO, you are the one who best represents Black people in South Africa. And I asked the question, so do you know in the flat that I live in Pretoria, how many people I live with? You have heard noise now. They just came back from school. I live with 2 nephews and my son. And this is that's why I'm saying charity begins at home. This is how, for me, in the education that my parents have given me, I'm making sure Ubuntu in my family continues, that my nephews have the right, at least, of education to find their way in life. I asked him, but my family is in the township. I go home to the villages every end of the year, every death, every whatever. I spend most of my money actually on the road because I don't live with my loved ones. I'm an alien where I am. So so I cannot answer these questions, but I think that human rights will truly be not be human rights when we understand as Black people through Isintu Sabantu. Until we have that, I don't know where they will put us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kobe. I think these have been very rich discussions coming from multiple perspectives. And I think challenging all of us to think deeper about what we take for granted. I'd now like to open up the floor for any questions, if anyone has. I see a lot of praise happening in the chat. But if anyone would like to make a comment or to participate in the discussion, please, this is the opportunity. Yes, Mr. Asim, I'm not sure.
Thank you,
UN?
thank you. Thank you, I'm a woman, thank you.
Thank you, sorry.
Thank you so much. Apologies, my camera on this laptop is not very good, so I can't use my video at the moment. I want to begin by thanking all the speakers for very insightful comments. Indeed, Lerato, thank you. I have known Lerato personally for a number of years, and I'm happy to be here at this setting and to hear her insights. Thank you also, Shirley, for your fantastic insights. I just wanted, it's not a question, it's just a reflection that I have had personally as an outsider in the to South Africa. By that I mean a non-South African citizen. I've always just wondered, because when you think in terms of the TRC, sometimes we use these words, whether politicians, the church, or what have you, without really thinking about them, especially in relation to what they mean and the implications of them in our local languages, like Lerato was trying to point out. Because for instance, when you talk about reconciliation talks about trying to make peace between 2 people or 2 individuals or 2 groups or more who previously had some kind of relationship and a good understanding, right? So then something went wrong and now you're trying to bring them back together again. So in the context of South Africa, I've always asked myself, what was the existing wonderful relationship that then got broken down and then the TRC was coming to bring in reconciliation? So that foundation is not there. So when you build on a wrong or inexistent foundation, you're just wasting everybody's time. It will amount to nothing and it will give us shambles. So I think that's part of the issues that we are grappling with at the moment, because who or what were we reconciling? They were never on good terms. They were never having any cordial relationship. They were never equals in any way. So what was the reconciliation all about? So we really need to think about these words, these concepts, whether it's inclusion, whether it's reconciliation, and all of those things before we conclude that this is what it means and this is how it must be implemented, especially for those who are in the oppressed or the weaker category. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I mean, it continues to, beyond just the TRC. It also speaks to policy making itself. I mean, I've been doing some work on the just transition, and one of my colleagues, Dr. Ntabi Makunwana, who works both in the Netherlands as well as at Stellenbosch, always speaks to the fact that there are lots of scientific terms that are supposed to be incorporated into policy making that do not translate to local languages at all. So people don't even understand what the basics are that are being included in policies that are supposed to be quote unquote just. And so she does a lot of work in trying to translate scientific terms into kind of, indigenous languages. and sometimes there are no words. And so I do think it's not just a conversation that needs to be had in the context of reconciliation, but in terms of ongoing justice work, who gets to decide what is included and what isn't included, which is why it's always a site of struggle. Are there any other questions, comments, thoughts? Please, we have great speakers on the panel. We might not get the opportunity to engage with him directly like this. Again. Yes, Gilbert, please go ahead. And then once Gilbert goes, and then we can take John Mark again. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Hope you can hear me. Okay. My reasoning, and this goes for most African former colonies, although they are still colonies by my reasoning, there is the absence of the will to implement whatever good legislations we take or measures that are actually written down. The failure to me, because the TRC, I don't want to, let me say it's a sham to me. It was created, but directives, how it has to go, still come from those people that the Black South Africans believe they were those who heard them. The leadership that was even supposed to implement, if they have the will, everything will go through well, but because they are not willing, and because the society is so corruption infested, that's why things don't move the way they are supposed to move. That is my own observation. I am Cameroonian, and it goes same with us here. It's terrible. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Prof, are you there? And then after Prof, we'll have Mabafukeng.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much for this robust discussion. And I just wanted to ask Shirley, because she suggests, and I think rightly so, that the global dynamics very largely shapes the internal manifestation of policies and decisions that are made, not only in South Africa, and not only in relation to the transition from apartheid to democracy, but I mean, generally speaking. And like Gilbert pointed out, across the African continent and the former colonies. So my question is this: two things. The first being, and this touches on Dr. Kobe's submission, that we cannot really envisage a successful reconciliation, and like Prof. Asim pointed out, when there was no previously existing cordial relationship. In that sense, how do we proceed? One. Then two, to the extent that the forces that shape the global development, to the extent that they continue to determine what happens in Africa, African communities, and how do we reimagine our coexistence as communities? So I just want your take on those two issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we also just take the question from Mabafukeng before, so that we can then wrap up after that? Mabafukeng, could you go ahead?
Oh, thank you. Mine is more of a reflection, I guess, more than a question. I'd like to thank both the speakers, Shirley and Dr. Gobe. I think as a young person and reflecting on the 30 years and reconciliation and trying to find out where it's coming from, because of the moral ills of the politicians not giving us space to reimagine ourselves in terms of where we're moving as young people, in a society where you're told to reconcile with people, like the first person that commented about reconciliation with people that don't even want to reconcile, you know, like moving forward, I feel like the discussion today kind of opened my mind as a young person for where the reconciliation was coming from and where we're always forced to perform that everything is fine. So I'd really like to thank both the speakers for giving us the perspective and also moving forward in terms of, as young people, how we can reimagine ourselves in the state that we find ourselves in. Thank you.
Thank you for that really lovely reflection. And I think these conversations are so important to be ongoing, particularly for that reason, so that we do kind of address the past in the present. Shirley, I'll give you the floor, and that can also be part of your concluding remarks. And then we'll give Dr. Kobe a few minutes to just for some concluding thoughts. Thank you, Shirley.
These are very good questions, and I think everyone in the room needs to also think about the answers to these very weighted questions of how do we reconcile, how do we move forward with the inherited baggage of an incomplete reflective past that didn't touch on the colonial period. It started with Afrikaner nationalism in 1948. So it was an amiss. It wasn't part of the process. Do we ask? Do we demand? Do we campaign? Do we advocate for a deeper process that goes back further? Perhaps that's the way forward. But I think we have to bring everyone. We have to have these dialogues. We need these seminars. We need this part of education. There's a sanitized version of history that is taught to children in primary school and high school and university. And we must break down the barriers and open up the floodgates of a proper curriculum that is based on truth and justice, and that we can then, as a nation and with young people and the intelligence and know-how, we need to grapple with a way forward. So it wouldn't be one view, it would be all of our views, and we have to start wherever we can on that road. And I think education is key to this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Dr. Kobe, you've got 4 minutes.
Thank you so much. First, I just want to say thank you to Umaria. We know each other for a long time. I mean, this is some of the conversation we used to have when we were jogging in the morning at Hector Peterson. I think I didn't mention that I did study at UWC, my honors and masters. And so it's really nice to be here again. So thank you for that comment. It's true. I mean, how do you even talk about reconciliation where there was never a relationship? And I think I'm going to start with the question, how can we imagine ourselves as young people? It's quite difficult because we had, I organized a symposium similar like this, but it was physical last month. And there, we had from young people who did PhDs on AI, theology, and Ubuntu, arguing that we are now in a world where we would have to contest the justice with robots. And he spoke about while we are still demanding water in the rest of the continent, basic human rights like land. Land for example, in South Africa, land has already been prepared to store the cloud for AI, for AI to function in this country. And I think when you think about those things, it's really hard to imagine ourselves. I think of Cornel West when he says, we can't tell the children there's no hope, but when you really look at the monster, you are like, there is no hope. So, but for me, on a personal level, I've tried to do for the people around me, as I am an African, we don't come from a nuclear family, but an extended family. I tried to do for those around me the little stuff that I can do. And I really think we really need to do that. And I think Black people are very good in that because we are raised through Ubuntu. So helping each other, it's something also our ancestors have used to cope with the system of oppression in the rest of the continent and in South Africa. So maybe we should continue in those levels and continue to press hard, as I know, Mabafugengi, your work on the arts and the museum in Africa. So I think we should press those PhDs. We should work in the ground with our people, and we should listen more to actually the poor, because I think that our generation of activists has lost that listening ear. We now quote Biko Pan-Africanism that is void of actually the actual people that these people Biko was talking about. And to conclude, I mean, corruption, I mean, look at how in Africa, even in countries that, like I made an example with Congo, the empire loves the corruption of Africa. And actually they are the ones who help Africa to become, who make Africa to become what it is. But maybe we do need, and I'm going to say something that is very controversial for others, but the other people who come from decoloniality will understand this. Some people are looking and praying every day for Burkina Faso, for Mali. So perhaps also the agency from our leaders, it's something that has been lost. You then sit down and realize all the people that cared for our people died in the struggle for liberation in the continent. We don't have real people who care for our people, because one of the very first thing we can start doing, and because I'm from the humanities, we need a culture. We need to create a culture that will make these things possible. Without having such a culture, I don't know where we will be as the continent. So, and that's where we are failing, because then we are getting all these scholarship grants, do maths, do whatever, always working for these big companies and stuff. But we are not able to define anything. I tell my students, please, we still don't have a policy at UNISA to regulate AI. I think rest of the universities, but also be aware that when I deliberately choose sources for you to read, I choose Black scholars, I choose scholars coming from the global South, I choose, there are also some European scholars that when you then go and use AI, it means that Black sources will not be included when you engage. And because as Black people, we need also again to argue for ourselves to be included in this whole AI stuff. So I always tell my students, I'm strict on this. Use the literature I recommend. You can go and use your AI for 1 or 2 sources, but I want you to read Lerato Kobe. I want to read Maria Mabafukeng. And I want you to read Donono, because those are also the way we can try to actually change our society. So in those words, I don't want to say there's no hope, but when we look at things as they are, you really feel like there is no hope for South Africa, for the continent, but we don't know what BRICS will bring. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kobe. I'm a bit more of an optimist. I think there's always hope. And I was with Justice Moseneke last night who spoke about, he said a wonderful quote that neither the purse nor the sword can coerce obedience in terms of the law, but we must sustain hope for an international system that will bring about peace and justice. I just want to read some comments from the chats. and then we can conclude. Ntando Sendane says, thanks a lot for your insights, Dr. Kobe. You're indeed reaffirming the notion that the TRC process, human rights, the constitution, and the politics of transition embraced Ubuntu whilst neglecting Abantu and Isintu. This was then a pretentious embrace of Ubuntu because it fundamentally refused to rehumanize the dehumanized indigenous people, to give back to them what was that which was stolen. Corruption and at inherently ethical levels. This is a wonderful discussion. And lastly, from Epiphany, I hope I said that correctly, an interesting discussion indeed, many things to reflect on. Thanks to the panelists and other contributors, the sense of humanism is being lost, and that's where many things go wrong. And I completely agree. This has been an incredibly rich discussion. I hope that we can continue having more of them. Thank you so much to UWC for hosting this discussion, and I hope to see you all soon at the next lecture. Have a lovely weekend, and we shall chat again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, colleagues. Bye-bye.
So
have
much.
a good afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Sorry, Prof.
Bye-bye.
We still need to have the closing remarks from Mr.
Sorry.
Seblela Tonono. So we are not really done.
Oh,
Mr.
so sorry about that.
It's okay, Thandiwe. Thank you so much for your able moderation. Mr. Tonono, over to you.
Okay. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm not like, let me just change my view. Yes. Good afternoon, colleagues. Once again, thank you very much to, let me extend a great word of thanks to Dr. Shirley Gunn, as well as Dr. Lerato Kobe for the insightful presentations, kind of giving us a very rich intellectual conversation to grapple with from multiple angles. And so we're thankful. And allow me also to express our word of thanks on behalf of the Center for Black Thought and African Studies for this wonderful collaboration between the Center for Black Thought and African Studies, as well as the UWC's Center for Criminal and Transitional and Criminal Justice. And so thank you very much to everyone who has made this webinar a success. And we're hoping that there will be more of these kinds of engagements going on. Hopefully, we will be also working to see what we build from this, particularly from the rich nuggets of presentations that we have received today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that is all. Thandiwe, you can close the meeting.
Thank you so much, Linda. My apologies again. Have a lovely weekend.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you very much, colleagues, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.